Alright guys, Mr. B here. In this video we're going to be going over the chapter 10.1 questions. Alright, starting off with number 1, it says, what is a fossil? So, a fossil is typically going to be the preserved remains or remains of some kind of organism that, died a long time ago. So, something along those lines. We can say a fossil is the remains or traces of an organism that died a long time ago. Something along those lines. Number 2, in general, how does a fossil form? There's a couple of different ways it forms, but typically in general, an organism is going to die. It gets covered by sediment relatively quickly, and then over time, that sediment's going to harden into rock and leave behind a fossil. So we're something along those lines. So we'll say, in general, an organism dies, gets covered by sediment quickly, and over time the sediment hardens into rock, preserving traces of the organism. Something along those lines. And let's change our font here to be a little bit smaller so we don't run out of space because I type a little bit too big. There we go. All right, number 3, which parts of an organism are most likely to be preserved as fossils and why? So the parts that are most likely to be preserved as fossils are teeth, bones, shells, pretty much any hard part of an organism. So we'll say hard parts of an organism are most likely to be preserved as fossils because soft tissue like organs and skin are either eaten by scavengers or they decay too quickly. Okay, so hard parts are usually going to be preserved as fossils because the soft material like organs and skin either gets eaten or decays very quickly and usually doesn't leave any kind of fossil around or anything around to be fossilized. All right, number 4, what are the 5 different kinds of fossils? Okay, so in the notes there are definitely 5 different types of fossils they talk about. So 1 was molds and casts. 2 was petrified fossils. 3 was carbon films. 4, this was trace fossils. Those are like footprints and stuff. And then the 5th one was preserved remains. Okay, so molds and casts are where you have like an impression in a rock that the organism leaves behind. Then water with minerals fills in and it kind of leaves behind a rock that sort of looks like the organism. Petrified fossil is where water seeps into the actual organism itself and replaces all the bone with stone. So you get a stone that looks just like the organism. Carbon film is where you have a very thin layer of carbon, sort of like a tattoo on like the surface of a rock. Trace fossils are things like footprints or poop or eggs or things that the organism left behind but aren't really pieces of the organism itself. They're things that give you clues about what the organism used to do or be like. And preserved remains are actual remains of the organism itself, frozen in ice or tar or amber, things like that. Okay, number 5, how does a carbon film fossil form? So carbon film is usually going to form when an organism dies. Sediment will cover it, and then the gases in the organism will evaporate and leave behind a very thin layer of carbon. So we can say something along the lines of a carbon film forms when an organism dies, gets covered in sediment, and the and carbon gases evaporate from the organism and leave behind a thin carbon film, something like that. Let's change our font size here. All right. Last question here, number 6. How are petrified fossils similar to preserved remains, and how are they different? All right. So petrified fossils are very similar to preserved remains in the fact that you have a fossil that looks exactly like the organism itself. Okay. The difference, however, is a petrified fossil is actually just a rock or stone that looks just like the organism, and preserved remains are the actual organism. Okay, so we're going to say something along those lines. So we'll say petrified. Let's make this a bit bigger too if we can. There we go. Petrified fossils and preserved remains both show an identical replica of the organism. The difference, though, is that a petrified fossil is just a stone that looks like the organism, and preserved remains are the organism. Okay, so that's the difference. So petrified fossil is just a rock that looks like the organism, whereas preserved remains are actually the organism. All right, last two questions here. Number 7, what are 2 things that scientists can learn from the fossil record? All right, so there's a lot of things we can learn from the fossil record, but 2 things. One, why is that small? Don't do that. 1, all right, whatever. There you go, 1. We can learn about past environments on Earth. So we can learn about what environments used to be like on Earth. And 2, we can learn how life has changed or evolved over time. Okay, so we can learn how life has evolved and changed over time. So those are the 2 things that we can learn, or at least 2 things of some things. We can learn multiple things, but all right, last question, number 8. What does the fossil record show about how life has changed over time? So the fossil record shows that life has changed from simple to more complex. Okay, so we can say that the fossil record shows that life has changed from simple organisms to more complex organisms over time. All right, so that is it for this section of notes and these questions. Hopefully it helps you. And as always, if you need help, please reach out. All right, I will see you in the next section. Bye.